So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at the kickoff for GISMO's Open Data Initiative. This has been several years of growing. It has started years ago. I looked back, I think it was 2017 that we had our first meeting with MODA and Beta NYC and had this huge discussion downtown about so what's up with this open data thing? Where are the standards? Why are we having so many issues with it? What's good, what's bad? And then it's kind of evolved into this thing like, okay, let's keep this consistent. And so GISMO's taken this upon themselves to keep it consistent and have that discussion board where we can have the spatial lens to open data. And so I thank you all for joining us. And before I get into the nitty gritty of what this event is going to be all about, I'd like to welcome and thank Jin Wen, who is GISMO's president, woohoo, to do a little intro to GISMO.
Yes, Jin, friends. Hello, thank you. Am I mute? Uh-oh.
Oh, you're good.
I'm good? Okay. I can't tell. Thanks, Doug. So I am here to welcome everyone on behalf of GISMO. Welcome, fellow GISMO members. GISMO. My name is Jin Wen, and I am GISMO's president. Thank you, everybody. And the directors and I have been, as Dara has noted, been working hard to continue to expand the tradition and the work GISMO has been doing for the last, guess what, 30 plus years. Applause, applause. Well, this is all really started by Jack Ackenbaum, the founding president and now President Emeritus. GISMO has been a place for discussions, thought leadership, and really advocacy. In 2022, we launched, as hopefully everybody may have had a chance to read in the newsletter, the TLC 2022 Initiative, a series of programs that tracking the trailblazing transformative innovations, such as the program today, Dara just discussed in presentation form, and L, laying down a leadership path for students and young professionals through mentorship and events and network events. C, to continue our conversation with city agencies and extend our conversations. And we plan to extend our conversation to the state, regional, and federal level agencies. So this is a very exciting week for GISMO. Today's program, again, is Tips and Tricks, one of our technology method and methodology pillar. And on Thursday, I just wanted to, again, invite everybody back for the part one of our job fair, panel discussion on the current trends in GIS with resume review and mock interview sessions. So those of us who are looking for JOB, please come check us out. So, and also stay tuned for June. Our popular program, App Fair, is back, where a number of city agencies will share what they are up to. And I think that Amy's gonna put them in the chat. I'm reading off my script, so I can't quite see everything yet. But anyway, less chat from me. Back to you, Dara. Thank you for listening, guys, and welcome.
Yay, thank you, Jin. I think we're all really excited to see what happens with your leadership, so thank you. And so I think I had a script also, but I don't like reading off of scripts. So I'm not going to give too much other info. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Doug, our main speaker for this evening. Because what he has to say, so a little bit about myself. I come from, I have 20 years experience with GIS, from data creation at the city agency level to researching at the academic level to a little bit of the private sector. And so open data sits at all of those tables, right? It sits at, there's a huge intersection between all those industries. And so what happens is the data comes in, somebody creates it, somebody uses it, and then there's somebody uses it as a research and all this stuff. So we're gonna start this series with Doug kicking us off as the Open Data Ambassador from the ground up, right? So we're gonna try to build this, and in the future, we'll have more use cases for how people are using the data. So let me properly introduce Doug Williamson. I can get my notes over here. So Doug Williamson is an open data ambassador and an open data coordinator at a large New York City government agency. In this capacity, he's responsible for identifying and enabling the delivery of data sets to the open data portal and performing public outreach and presentations with the aim of increasing strategic use of the city's data sets. He's held a number of positions in the public sector, spanning from fields as technology, housing, and law enforcement. Prior to his career in city government, he received his master's and PhD from City University of New York. During that time, he participated in a number of geocentric research projects centered primarily on crime, public housing, and the environment. In addition to his full-time role, Mr. Williamson is also an adjunct professor, as many of us know him as, in the geography department of Hunter College, where he teaches a variety of classes in GIS, cartography, and geovisualization, and an instructor at Columbia University, where he conducts seminars on data visualization. So as you can see, Doug is the perfect person to kick this off with his breadth of experience and expertise. So thank you, Doug. Welcome. All yours. Let me stop sharing this.
Thank you, Dara. So let me share my screen now.
How do I stop sharing?
I got it.
Okay.
I just took it. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So again, thank you, Dara. Thank you, GISMO, for inviting me. This is the New York City Open Data 101 training session. So as the name implies, this is really meant to be an introduction to open data. It assumes no knowledge of open data whatsoever. We're going to go through the background and history and get you up to speed on using open data. The primary goal is to raise awareness about open data and its relevance in government transparency and accountability. So, hopefully when you leave today, you'll have an improved understanding of New York City open data, its history, its mission, and more importantly, some new skills for navigating the city's open data platform. So as Dara mentioned, I'm an open data ambassador. The way I like to think of it, the way I like to describe it is I'm like a reference librarian for open data, right? I'm here to guide you as end users through the vast holdings and answer any questions you might have. As Dara mentioned, I work full-time for a large city agency, and part of my responsibilities there are being an open data coordinator. So what that means is I liaise with the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics and work with the Department of Information Technology, Telecommunications, and we publish our agency's data holdings on the open data platform. And every city agency has an open data coordinator, and they do similar things within their organization. So just before we get started, I don't know if we can do this. I'm going to try it as a little experiment. Using the reactions in Zoom, if you're familiar with that, down on the bottom there, if you could raise your hand if you've ever been to the New York City Open Data Portal. Again, it's not required, no experience is necessary, but I'm just sort of trying to gauge usage. Okay, so it looks like some of you have, but some of you have not, which is perfectly fine. All right, so just a little bit, give credit where credit is due. The material for this training was co-created by the New York City Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, or MODA for short, and the civic technology organization Data NYC. Okay, so these two groups were instrumental in developing this sort of curriculum that we're going to go through today. What I want to say real quick, though, is that a lot of the principles around government transparency stem from an organization called the Sunlight Foundation. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's basically a metaphor for an architectural window, right? And the thinking goes like this. By opening up this window into the walls of government institutions, the sunlight shines through, shedding light on the government's activities and acts as a cleaning agent or a disinfectant, right? So this promise of open data is really critical, right? This sort of opens up the agencies and lets residents and citizens see what's going on behind typically closed walls. It's also important because it empowers people, right? It gives people the opportunity to take action, using this data. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of open data in New York City. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the word open. You know, it might be sort of semantics, but I think it's important. You know, if we think about the word open, most of us think of it as an adjective, but it could be a noun or a verb. You know, in the case of open data, I think most people think of it as an adjective, right? Unrestricted. You know, the data is unrestricted to the public. But I like to think of it as an employee of the city. I like to think of it as a verb. You know, meaning that as an open data coordinator, I'm granting access, right? Or I'm enlightening the residents of the city. You know, the city is opening up its data holdings to the public, which I think is a really powerful thing and a really important thing, especially in this day and age and what's going on in society. So this really is an ideology, right? To open up the data, you know, promoting transparency, accountability, and then, you know, again, creating value for the public. For some of us, open data may be a new concept, and even for experienced users of open data, we might think that it's a fairly recent, you know, development, but there is a history here. So that while the current incarnation may be relatively new, open data has a long history in the evolution of democratic government. Long before things like big data, data analytics, data lakes, and all these constructs, there was a strongly held belief that information created or collected by the government belongs to the tax-paying public. In New York City, the idea that government activity should be open traces back to the 19th century. During the 19th century, the late 19th century, the progressive era reformers sought to remedy the ills of corruption and quid pro quo governance in Tammany Hall and the political machine that existed in the city. So the roots of the open data movement, especially in New York City, can actually be traced back to those efforts in the late 1800s. The city's record was created in 1873, and it still exists today in both print and digital form. And it acts as a central repository for information about the city's solicitations, public policies, purchases, and hiring. So this is an example of the city record. And as you can see from the date, this goes back to 1873, right? June 24th, 1873. And again, the idea was to sort of open up what was going on, the activities in city government, right? Where was money being spent? Who was being hired? Things like that. So this was a really big step in the idea of open government. If we fast forward, you know, several decades to the 1960s, freedom of information legislation, which some of us might know as FOIL or FOIA laws, are beginning to be passed, particularly at the federal level, but also at state governments. The FOIL legislation made government information available upon request. So what that meant was, if you knew what you were looking for, you can ask for it. And if the information exists and can be shared, right, it's not sensitive or private, it'd be shared with you. In some cases, the now public records are shared more widely, but often only to the person that the requester, only to the requester. So with FOIL, most government information is available if someone asks for it. And at the time, that was really revolutionary, right? You know, basically what this is saying is the law said that if somebody asks, the government has to provide it, which was a big deal. And this was particularly important for the media and journalists, right? So they were writing articles, they had access to this information, which they previously didn't. Locally, more locally, in 1993, New York City released something called the Public Data Directory. And what I want you to keep in mind is at this point, right, this is 1993 now, up to this point from the 60s on, the FOIL legislation was in place, right? But the problem with the FOIL legislation was that most people didn't know what they didn't know, meaning they didn't know what they should even ask for, right? So they had no idea that some of this stuff even existed. So they really couldn't frame a proper FOIL request. So locally, this directory would help guide people as they made their requests. So this made a subset of information available through FOIL more accessible. This is really important because now the people know in advance what they have available to them or what's available to them. So this public directory, is really interesting. I definitely recommend you take a look if you're interested sort of in history, particularly things, for those of us in GISMO and interested in mapping, particularly a lot of the stuff that city planning currently releases was available back in 1993, which is really interesting to me. And if you go through this, you'll see that some of the data that's still available today has evolved over time, but it's goes back to 1993 when some of this digital data was just being created in the first place, which is interesting from a historical perspective. So while FOIL was a big step in the right direction and it was further bolstered locally by the public data directory that was created in 1993, there was still a fundamental issue here. The big problem, the long pole in the tent, was still this requirement that a user request the data, right? That had to be proactive, right? So in 2012, that issue was finally addressed with the introduction of Local Law 11 in 2012. It's the city's first open data legislation. And in short, the law required the city itself to publish the data proactively, as opposed to responding to specific requests for public information on an ad hoc basis. So again, to be clear, this isn't a policy or a recommendation or a guideline. This is a law, and a law that guarantees that the public has access to this information in perpetuity, regardless of administration, right? So now the city is on the hook, basically, for releasing this data continuously. And that's really a game changer, right? Nothing like this had ever existed until 2012. So what does it look like today? Well, on this visual, on this graphic, we're trying to summarize that it's basically everything, right? It's every facet of city life. It's, the location of trash receptacles, it's street light inspections, it's buildings, it's building inspections, it's, licensed taxi cabs and trips related to taxi cabs, right? So this is a photograph of, East 14th Street, and there's a lot going on. And there's a lot going on in open data too. Like I said, basically every aspect of city life, there are some corresponding data sets that go along with it. So what makes something open data, right? The first thing is, maybe it's easier to talk about what open data is not. I like to think of it that way just because it gets a lot of stuff out of the way. So open data is not pre-aggregated data. It's not summarized in any way. It's not PDFs of tables or scans or anything like that. In this example, we have a scanned map. That is not open data. While it's interesting to look at and provides context, technically it's not open data, right? In general, open data is structured, incident level, machine readable data, right? So this generally means that it's presented in a table, right, in tabular form with rows and columns. And it could be any tabular format, right? It could be a comma separated value file or an Excel file. Those are tabular formats. But in general, this is just any standard format that a computer can understand. So again, like this map showing the original plan for Central Park, it doesn't have a table backing it up, right? This is just a scan, it's an image. It doesn't qualify as open data. However, if you go into the open data portal, you'll see that there's a map of New York City trees based on the tree inventory that a city agency conducted a number of years ago. That map would be considered open data because there's a table supporting it underneath. Some other things to talk about when we're talking about open data. It means that the data is not private or confidential, right? So data sets are closely reviewed for personal information before they are posted publicly. In a few instances where there's an important reason for members of the public to have access to otherwise private information, this data can be made public. So for example, there's a data set of city employee names and salaries. This is publicly available and is posted in open data. And again, there's a compelling reason, the public in mind, to avoid corruption and things like that, conflicts of interest. This data is made available for public consumption. So let's talk a little bit now about the open data portal that the city has developed. So as of 2022, the end of 2022, the New York City Open Data portal contains more than 3,000 data sets, which corresponds to billions of rows of data. It's managed collaboratively by a staff from the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics and the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, which has now been renamed Department of Information Technology. This is collectively the New York City Open Data team. And as I mentioned before, every city agency has an open data coordinator. There are over 100 of them spread throughout city government. Every city agency, office, or commission, including elected officials like the city council, has an open data coordinator. These coordinators are well versed in their agency's data, and they're responsible for working with the open data team to identify, structure, document, publish, update, and share to the public. Okay. So again, we're talking about opening data, right? Making government data accessible to the public. This is the NYC or New York City Open Data portal, and the website for this is nyc.gov/opendata. And this is the landing page that you'll get when you get there. I just want to highlight a couple things as we work our way through this. The first thing this landing page provides for us is a search bar, which allows us to search the open data holdings, right? So any topic you're interested in, buildings, taxi cabs, restaurants, whatever, law enforcement, whatever you're interested in, you can enter into the search bar, and it will, return results related to your search. Every data set, and this, is one of the things that the open data coordinators work on, tags their data sets with keywords that they think are the most relevant. So whether it's, if you're talking about inspections, maybe it's building inspections, and it's elevators and plumbing and electrical and other tags that might be deemed relevant to those specific inspections. And those will be tagged in there to facilitate these searches. There's also an option just to click on this data link at the top, and it will take you right to a list or overview of these 3,000 data sets that I mentioned before. If you click on that tab, you'll be taken to this data page. The data page is organized a couple of different ways. The first thing is by agency, right? So every agency is listed, and you can click on them if you know specifically, that you're interested in, say, crime data. So maybe you go directly to the NYPD data holdings. Or if you're interested in taxis, maybe you go directly to the Taxi and Limousine Commission. There's also organization by category, right? And these are more broad overviews, business related, education, as you can see here, different things listed. Health spans multiple agencies, for example, right? Whether it's health and hospitals or Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. There are different, so this is a broader category than just a specific agency. There's also an option to look at popular data sets, which is, you know, if you're sort of just perusing, this might be a fun way to view it, just to see what's the most popular. You know, what are other people looking at? You know, one of the popular ones here, for example, is the New York City baby names, which, you know, could be, you know, a fun resource to look at. Then there's new data sets, right? If you're a frequent user of open data, maybe you want to just check back and see what's new. City agencies are continuously updating there. I should mention that there's a compliance plan that every agency updates every year to include, you know, what they did in the previous year and what their plan is for the next year. So this is constantly evolving, right? This didn't start out with 3,000 data sets. It's evolved over time, and agencies are continuously adding to this as new data sets get identified. So let's walk through a specific example. So for if you're interested to see what the Open Data Portal contains about 311 data. So if I enter 311 into the search bar and hit return, it will bring me not to this. This is just a little background on 311. 311 is the city's non-emergency hotline, right? So for emergencies, we call 911. For non-emergencies, we call 311. And this will route your call to the respective agency to work on whatever it is your issue is. So whether it's a pothole or a missed garbage collection, broken street light, you know, a noise complaint, a blocked driveway, a blocked bus stop, something like that, you can call 311 and they will route that. They will create a service request and route that request to the appropriate city agency. It's been in place since, I believe, 2010. These are, you know, this is a 24 hours a day, 7-day a week operation. It's available in 175 languages and spans 3,600 government services. There are, when I say there are literally millions and millions of records, I'm not exaggerating, right? This is a huge voluminous data set. So once we type in 311 into our search bar, it brings us to our search results page. And the first entry there is this 311 service request from 2010 to present, right? So this data set, you know, if you're curious, right, when it was last updated, this, you know, this is not accurate. This is a little out of date because it gets updated daily. And the last, you know, it tells you the last day, and it tells you the number of views, right? How many people have viewed this data. So if we click on the link to that, this will take us to our overview page, right? Every data set, the 311, in 311 speak, this overview page is called the primer page. And every data set has a primer page, and they all look exactly the same. They all look just like this. The only thing that's different is the details about that data set. So on this primer page, there are things like the date the data was last updated, the frequency of updates, how much the data set has been viewed and downloaded, right? So notice in this case, right, it was, you know, over 442,000 views, almost 400,000 downloads. As I mentioned before, millions of rows, right? 27.5 at the time this was captured. It tells us a little bit about the table itself, right? 41 rows, and each row is a service request. Each row is an incident. So this primer page can be very useful, right? Again, when it was updated, the update frequency, right? This is daily. So this is all pretty important information. There's also, I wanted to talk about this attachment here. Every data set has a data dictionary, right? And there on the primer page is a link to this data dictionary. The Open Data team standardized on this Excel format. That way, every data dictionary would look very similar, right? So they have the same structure. Again, the only thing that's different is, you know, that they are specific to each data set. So if we click on this link, it would open up this data dictionary. And I'm just going to show you what that data dictionary looks like. Right, so this is one of the tabs from the 311 data dictionary. And we can see, for example, that it has a list of all the columns in that table with a description of it and what the expected values are, and then some notes about them as well. So from an analysis perspective, this is really helpful, right? We don't really need to start, going through the whole data set. If we look at the data dictionary and see that the information we're looking for isn't available, right? So this is pretty helpful. So here's just another example of that, right? This is just a screenshot of the same thing. I just wanted to show you that it's, a real thing if you were interested. On the primer page, there's other actions that we can take. The first one is highlighted here in red. This is to view data, right? So once we've thoroughly reviewed the primer page and we understand the context and the contents of the data, now we can dive right in and take a look at the data by viewing it. The first thing that I want to mention as we view data is this ability to filter data, because as I said before, there's over 27 million rows of data, right? That's kind of voluminous. And frankly, you're not going to be able to look at it in one shot. If we look on the page here, a couple things, as I mentioned, there's a number of columns and millions of rows. And as we can see down on the bottom on the status, it says we're showing 1 to 100, right? The first 100 rows of 27.5 million rows, right? So we're not looking at a lot of data here. So it's important that we filter the data, right? Maybe we don't want to look at the maybe we only want to look at data from a particular agency or for a particular time period or for a particular call type. The Open Data Portal gives us the ability to create those types of filters. So, for example, if we wanted to look at street conditions, we could create a filter for just street conditions. So each column, just a sort of a little bit of background on the tabular structure here, right? Columns are basically attributes or characteristics that describe each one of the rows, right? So if you remember back to a couple slides ago, each row in this 311 table is the 311 service request. So every column then describes that row, right? That service request. So, and again, in this table, there are 41 of those columns or characteristics, right? Those are the columns are our attributes. There are any one of those columns are subject to filtering, right? So we could create a filter based on the community board, for example, right? There's a column called community board. And if we're only interested in looking at community board 1 in Queens, we could set up a filter to do that. And then that would narrow down our search considerably, right? So if this will greatly reduce the size of our filters, right? So notice now that we're looking at rows 1 to 100 of 546,000, right? So we've greatly reduced the size of our data set just by implementing this simple filter, right? We're geographically focusing in on one area in Queens now. If we create a more complex filter, which we can certainly do, right? We can add a date filter, for example, and we can also add a filter by agency, right? So now we're doing only service requests in Community Board 1 in Queens between a certain date, right? After, the beginning of the year, for example, right? Year to date, and then only for the Department of Sanitation. And then if we look down now again to the bottom, we can see that we've greatly reduced it to 289 records. What's also great about the Open Data Platform is you're not limited to work in the Open Data Platform, right? If you want to go do your own analysis now, feel free, right? You can have at it. You can download this data set by using this export menu at the top, and you can download it in a variety of file formats. And if you want to use this in Excel or Tableau or some statistical package like S+ or R, feel free, right? You can download this and use it on your computer as necessary. But if you do want to continue working in the open data platform, there are a number of tools for visualization, right? So, you don't have to be, know Tableau or write Python code to, do some visuals. There's a menu called Visualize that's also there, which allows us to create some very standard formats, right? You'll see along the top here, this sort of tool palette, right? We can do horizontal bar charts, vertical bar charts, pie charts, line charts, histograms, scatter plots, maps, of course, right? All of that is available. Again, we can use the filtering functionality and include that, and then we can create a variety of different visualizations, all within the open data platform, right? Which is really great, right? So we don't, there's no expectation that you're going to be a visualization wizard outside. You can use the tools right there built in. So in this case, right, we've created a pie chart using the borough as our, we're grouping by borough essentially, and we're counting the number of service requests by borough. Of course, there's mapping functionality, which is of huge concern to us, right? We can create simple point maps, for example, or we could create choropleth maps if we're interested. One of the things about open data is that I should mention, I talked about local law 11 of 2012 as being the first local law. Well, there have been subsequent local laws adding to that. And one of them, Local Law 108 of 2015, requires that every data set containing street addresses also contain coordinates, right? So what that means is if you've ever had a list of addresses and you said, wow, it'd be great to see these on a map, there's a process for that, but in the open data world, you don't have to worry about that, right? You don't have to worry about address matching to get points on a map. All of the open data sets that have addresses will include coordinates. So you can take those coordinates, typically they're in latitude and longitude, but other times they're in the city state plane coordinates, and you can use those to create your own maps. So inside the 311 data set, for example, there are latitude and longitude columns, and it was those that was used to generate this map here. So that's really powerful. I should also mention, as part of that open data law, certain data sets will include other geographical identifiers, right? So things like community board or zip code, things like borough block and lot numbers. For those of you that are familiar with those might be included in the data as well. So, you could use those community board numbers, for example, to do a choropleth map, or the zip codes to do a choropleth map, right? We can use those as aggregators. So again, this is a map of 311 requests submitted on a single day, again, using those latitude and longitude coordinates inside. Other approaches, right? Bar charts, for example, notice again, we're doing a filter, right? This time by agency for a certain time period. And we're using the complaint type to see what that looks like visually on our bar chart, right? So these are the various complaint types for the Department of Transportation for this given time period. Okay, so tools that use open data. There are, again, the idea here is engagement, right? The whole purpose of open data is to get people interested in the inner workings of city government, right? To see how the government is functioning. So a number of online tools have been developed that are built on or leverage open data. For example, there's a, excuse me, there's a project gallery that you can view. It's essentially a library of tools that build on open data. And if you develop your own, you can submit those to be featured in this open data project gallery. So just the URL is there, nyc.gov/open data projects. And this is a good way to see how other people are leveraging open data. A big part of this, as I mentioned, is the geographic component, is the mapping. There are a number of web-based mapping applications that have been built on open data. Some of these have been created by city agencies, as the ones that I'm showing here, but some people from the public have created their own as well. So these ones here, this link here, nyc.gov/maps, focuses on the ones created by city agencies. And again, these leverage publicly available or open data. All right, so how do we go about answering questions and solving problems with open data? Well, basically, there's a workflow, right? There's a process that we should adhere to or follow, right? So we've just learned about open data, right? As a program, we've looked at the data itself, right? We filtered it, created visualizations. How do we go about and leveraging that in a practical way? So sometimes you're working with it just for purely exploratory, right? You're just poking around, trying to have some fun and see what's out there. But again, that's fine, but a lot of cases will be more practical, right? Maybe you work for an advocacy group or a not-for-profit, or maybe you're working on a project for school. Maybe you're doing research, or maybe you're working on a news story for the media, or some a blog post or something like that. And you want to answer some question, right? So open data is the perfect tool to help answer those questions, right? So here we've highlighted this workflow, this approach that we sort of recommend, and I'll just walk through that. The first thing we need to do is define the problem you're trying to solve, right? So what question are you trying to answer, essentially, right? Part of that is understanding your stakeholders, right? Who is essentially interested in this question. So here on the right, I have this use case, right? So you're working for a New York City government agency. Your team would like to implement a support program for restaurants consisting of small grants and loans, and you're tasked with developing this program, right? So the first question is, what restaurants should receive funding, right? So that's your question, right? That's your problem. So the second step then is to familiarize yourself with the data sets on the open data platform to see if they can inform the problem, right? They may or they may not, but it's going to be up to you to sort of identify those data sets first and foremost, but then sort of evaluate them, right? Which ones are going to be potentially helpful to you, right? So we talked about going to the open data website and using the search bar, right? So we can use key terms, right? Like business or restaurant. And once we do that, we can, look at the various data holdings related to that, right? So we have, two different searches, one for business, one for restaurants. They will return different search results. And then it's up to us to go to each one of those in turn, right? View their primer page, look at their data dictionaries, and see if they're helpful, right? To see if they're useful, right? So notice that there's, a whole bunch of stuff gets returned, right? Not all of these are going to be useful. It's up to us to go through and get familiar with the data and see if they're germane to our problem. So again, how do we do that? Well, one way is to use the primer page, also use the data dictionary, right? This is an example from that Excel file. And we can see, right? So one of the questions is, does the Business Acceleration Program provide financial support? That's sort of a fundamental issue here that we need to understand. So if we look at the data dictionary, we can see that this one data set does not provide financial support. It only provides in-kind support, right? So that's important that we understand that distinction, right? The data set doesn't have anything to do with financial support, or I'm sorry, the program that this data is based on doesn't provide financial support. It just provides in-kind support, right? So this may be useful when deciding which restaurants your city agency should give financial support to, right? when you don't know or you're not sure or things aren't clear, our advice to you is get help, right? And how do we get help? Contact the Open Data Help Desk. The Open Data team, reviews these emails, these contacts continuously. So you give them, a data set URL and you ask them a question. Is this related to financial support, for example, right? And they'll do their research and their due diligence, and they'll get back to you with a response, right? So when in doubt, ask the experts, right? Just like anything else. Then the next step, frame the specific questions, right? So now we need to be a little more focused, right? We need to drill down a little bit. So we need to ask specific questions, right? Which restaurants have received grade A restaurant inspections, for example, or which restaurants have already received support, or which ones employ the largest number of people, and so on, right? So these are, again, we're drilling down, right, to get more specific to address our current problem. If we look at one of these data sets, for example, this one is the DOHMH New York City restaurant inspection results, right? If our question was, which restaurants got a score of A, those are the ones that we want to provide it to, our funding to, or support to. This data is included here, right? We can see that one of the columns is the grade, right? Grade associated with the inspection. So, this would be, if that was our question, right? Which restaurants received a grade A, then this data set would answer that question for us, right? Or would help us. The next step is to do some analysis, right? And again, maybe you're using some of the tools in the Open Data platform, or maybe you're downloading the data and doing them somewhere else. Maybe you're using Excel and doing pivot tables or something like that, which is completely fine. Again, choose the data that's appropriate to your question. This is a totally different data set now. This is a data set called the Open Restaurants data set, Open Restaurants Inspections, actually. Here we go, the source, the Open Restaurants Inspections data set. And this is actually, for those of you who are curious, it's a relatively new data set. During the pandemic, a number of restaurants, were given access to, the street and the sidewalk where they could serve their customers. So part of that included inspections of those areas. If you wanted to see which of those restaurants were roadway compliant, we could create a pivot table and summarize that in a pie chart, right? So again, it all depends on the question you're trying to answer. Sometimes though, the data might not be perfect, right? And the city's aware of that, right? Here, notice that this is the restaurant inspection data again, and notice that there's a big number has no value. So this might be a problem for you, right? Maybe this is too much of a gap that you're not willing to accept, right? This is not, maybe for whatever reason, you have a business rule in place that this won't be helpful. So it's important to know that, right? So it's important to take time to familiarize yourself with the data and understand some of the limitations of the data, quite frankly. I say this all the time about open data, having worked with the public a lot and how they use it. And this is more just of managing the expectation. I like to joke with the people that, open data is not Burger King, right? Sometimes you can't have it your way. This data was collected by a specific city agency for a specific purpose, right? They have a specific mission and mandate, and that's what the data is for. It might not meet all the needs of all the people, and that's okay, right? It meets that city agency's needs, and that's really what's critical. So, sometimes people complain, oh, they don't have this, or the city doesn't capture this. Well, maybe that agency doesn't need to capture that, and so they don't include that, or they don't have it. So I just throw that out there as sort of a warning. It's possible that you may not find what you need, unfortunately. But on that contact us thing, there is the ability to make a request, right? That might be a important data set, right? And you can recommend that, right? And the city will add that to the queue as a possible, future data release, right? They call them nominations, right? So you can nominate some new data sets. And then the last step in the process is, now that you've done your analysis, now it's time to make your decisions or provide recommendations to the stakeholders and allow them to make their decisions, right? So now this open data is, evidence-based, right? You hear that term a lot. We're trying to enable government entities and stakeholders to make more informed decisions to help them develop, policy. And now we're doing, we're using open data to achieve that, right? So that's really important. I'm just trying to look at time here, a couple more minutes here. As I mentioned, you can nominate data. How do you do that? Go to the contact us. There's an option to choose, what do you want to do? So feel free to reach out to the Open Data Help Desk. Again, the city is actively pursuing engaging the residents and the citizens of the city. So this is, very important to them. Don't be shy. If you have any issues or comments or suggestions, feel free to use this to reach out to the Open Data team. As I mentioned, there are other people like you that are interested in open data and are using open data. There is a Project Gallery that's available. I highly recommend you take a look there. This isn't limited to just maps, although maps play a big part in a lot of these applications or projects. But again, this is how other people are using open data. Every year, there's an annual event called Open Data Week that you can sign up for. We just passed the one in 2022. It was in March of 2022. And there's events all week long related to open data. People offering, giving tutorials on how to use it, giving demonstrations on tools they've created, projects they've created. And this goes on for a week. There are recordings from previous years that you can go view. This is a great way to see, some of the potential of these open data sets. So with that said, I will pause now for questions. I don't know, Dara or Amy, if there's a preferred way to do this. If people just want to come off mute or use the chat, I'm fine with either one.
They could use the Zoom raise hand or type it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, there are not many of us, so whatever you guys prefer. I would just like to say thank you, Doug. So I think I'm a prime example of why we need this initiative, because I've been, I guess, out of the loop for a little bit of time, especially since the beginning of this in 2017, and it's come a long way. So it was nice for you to set the baseline of where open data is right now. And now we can get into the nitty gritty, see how people are using it, what additional gaps there are, how do we use it this way, how do we do it this way, what's working, what's not working. So thank you for setting the baseline. That was really fantastic. And are there any questions from the crowd? Thank you for the wonderful presentation on open data. Really good intro. I'll certainly look more. So in terms of looking more, I guess I'm a little old school. And so I go to the open data portal with a specific ask and I find that thing and don't even explore the different avenues. So it was really nice that you shared all the different entry points that have evolved. I didn't know you could visualize things in that portal right now. So it's pretty cool. You don't have to export everything. And
yeah, it really is powerful. I mean, it's not going to replace Tableau or something like that, but it's a good first cut at a lot of these things, which I think helps a lot of people, especially students and community members, right? Community board members, things like that. It really is very helpful.
Absolutely. And so the other thing that I want this initiative to capture is all of the different people that can benefit from this data, right? So the GISMO board, I mean, we're veterans with GIS data, right? So we'll export that and figure out how to use it. But for those people who are just getting started, you know, there are a lot of ways that you can just explore and learn this way, figure out where the no data values are.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dara, though, but that's going to be the next step, right? We'll start getting into the weeds a little bit, right?
We are getting into the weeds. So if there are no more questions, then I will just pitch our ask. We can't do this alone. We want you. We want you. So we need your help. What are you working on? Can you share what's going on in your world? Do you have any questions? If you are a veteran and you specifically work with a data set you're developing or you're familiar with, are you a data ambassador that would like to do a presentation and show us what's up? All of those things are welcome here because we want this to be a complete conversation. So for our next event, which we're hoping to have in October, we're looking for you.
Dara, can I also add an extra thing here? I think this is also a great place for collaboration, meaning that if those are who needs help, like I think you made a post about how can GISMO help. Please, if you need some help with data visualization, please do reach out to GISMO info@gizmo.nyc.org. And maybe we can do a match and maybe the result can be the next presentation in October. Who knows?
Can I just,
Definitely.
I saw one of the chat, Mark had a comment about metadata. And Mark, to address that, you know, I mentioned the additional open data laws or subsequent laws. One of them was specifically about metadata. So all layers, data sets, all new data sets should have metadata. There should be a data dictionary associated with it. If there isn't, or it doesn't, you know, answer the specific questions you have, by all means, use that, contact us and reach out to the Open Data Help Team, because that absolutely should be covered. You know, the metadata should be included with any release.
Actually, Doug, I do have a question for you. And as a data ambassador, sometimes the data that you see is like they set a cyclical, right? We do this every January or February, however that goes. If for whatever reason you want something like in the 6 months point, can you reach out to the contact? Is there a contact in those excuse me, in the details? So say, can you do?
Usually the way it works is if you use the contact us, that will go to the open data team and they'll route it to that city agency's open data coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
So you won't have a direct link to them. You'll go through the open data team, but they will reach out to the person responsible.
Okay, so they would do, let's say, a midpoint extract.
You know, I can't say yes or no. It's possible, right? There might be some technical limitations or some reasons why they can't. You know, maybe there's the questions about, you know, the accuracy of the data or something like that. You know, the update cycle internally that the agency has. There might be valid reasons why they can't do it, but if they can, they certainly will try to accommodate that for sure.
Oh, we do have a question from Lisa Palmer. Right, Dara, I see something.
Yeah, so I see the question. I'm looking specifically for data sets regarding Hispanic-owned businesses in NYC. I don't, off the top of my head, Lisa, I don't know the answer to that. You know, there are, you know, data sets related to, you know, businesses as far as the demographics of the owners. I don't know if that's included. It's a great question, you know, to look at the metadata to see what's included in that. I'm not sure, frankly.
Oh, actually, I can support that. It's not in the open data, but if you go to small business services, it's not as comprehensive, but perhaps there is something for the WBE registration. So if you could start, that may be a place to start.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jen. I should mention that. So again, remember in the presentation, I was talking about the what makes it open data and how it's, typically incident level, right? A lot of agencies might release aggregate data on their own websites, right? So maybe it's EDC or Small Business Services. They might have reports or Excel files of pre-aggregated data, which might answer your question. Lisa, they might do it by, aggregate by borough or something like that, and it will tell you the numbers. So that's another option, but that doesn't fall technically as open data.
Yes. So I know that's perfect. In addition to SBS, if you're looking for registered, because that's the only way you can see, I think the MTA and Port Authority, they also have for MWBE. That might be other, right? Can you think of other places, Doc? Those are only 3 major ones I can think of from that they actually send out there saying these are the folks we work with.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good start.
Maybe the state has some version of it. You may have to call through.
The state has their own open data platform too. So yeah, I mean, they might have licensing information for sure. Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Anything else from the crowd? See, Johan says, thank you for the maps and projects page. I also had not come across these. I'm not sure how we're supposed to know when updates are made at the portal or when the frequency of certain data sets changes. Is there a mailing list that we should sign up with? Or maybe GISMO can take responsibility for, I don't know, having more of these kind of workshops to let GISMO folks know? I don't know. Just throwing out ideas here, because obviously there's the communication loop, a break in the communication loop.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion about, the list. I can take that back to the open data team. Yeah, other than just being proactive and coming back and looking at the new data sets, you're right. There's sort of no real way to know. I know Beta NYC, since they're heavily involved, they have a Slack channel and stuff like that. They, occasionally you'll see announcements. Oh, a new data set was updated or released. So that's one way. That's a possibility.
That goes back to our original problem. Jen, we're all, there's so many different platforms. How do we keep abreast on all of this? I don't know. But we are the GIS people, so maybe we can step in somehow for, I don't want a Slack page. I'm just putting it out there. Every once in a while, I'll go back to the Beta NYC website, and I'm like, why is there's nothing new going on here? Because they've migrated everything somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe Doug, you can bring it back to the open data folks. Maybe have features, new data, like the latest. Can you filter by the newest dates? I actually never tried that. Maybe.
I'm pretty sure you can. Because you can filter by agency, so I think you can do by last updated date. Yeah,
maybe that's one thing. It is really a bit. It's quite a DIY, and I think that's why I think, Dara, thank you for doing this, because it is the space for exchange and discussion, and definitely in the DNA of GISMO. And thanks, Doug, for getting the lead going. This is amazing. It's true. Even as veterans, sometimes we go, "What? Where's that? What did you say?"
Yeah, just to let you know, you can. I just checked, right? So I just did a search for DOB, and you can sort by recently added or recently updated.
That's great to know.
Yeah, there goes the tips and tricks.
Tips and tricks to be continued. All right, it's 7:07. We should call it quits, but I think we have something going here. Through all the newbies and the veterans, I think we all may have learned something new. And so if you haven't learned something new, you shared something new. That's the whole idea behind this initiative. So let's keep it going. I will send out a follow-up message to everybody with the recording link of this and maybe a follow-up survey, and to capture any kind of suggestions you have for how we should move forward. Oh, we'd like to have a committee, a GISMO committee, because obviously we can't do this alone. And so if you'd like to be involved in figuring out how to move forward, how we should engage with different agencies, how we can engage with different stakeholders, students, anybody, we want you at the table. So if you'd like to be a part of that committee, let me know. And thank you, Doug. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jen. Thanks, Noreen. I saw you over here. Nice to see you, Lisa. Hi, Johan. Thanks, Danielle, Joseph. Hi, Rachel. Thanks, everyone, for your participation.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
See you next time.